Yeah, in a everything here wants to kill you kind of way.
No, I just mean that even amongst the madness, there's a sort of delicate grace. Destruction and corruption are forms of creation in themselves.
Wow, you sound like a serial killer.
What?
Destruction and corruption, beautiful forms of creation in themselves.
I don't sound like that.
You absolutely sound like a...
You absolutely sound like that. Yeah? See? Too bad, aren't you?
You're fucking stupid.
It's time to stop, okay?
But perhaps not everyone has the sensitivity and subtlety required to appreciate the beauty inherent in chaos.
Sure, Hannibal.
Who?
Just stop.
Oh, yeah. Joke.
Bingo.
Forspoken is what you get when you make a game with the mindset of quantity over quality. You get a large, open world game, barren and devoid of any life. Forspoken, more like forgotten, because that's what happened after I beat this game. Everything in this game was so generic and bland, from the characters, the world, the gameplay. Nothing really stood out as amazing or interesting. And you know it's concerning when the developers refuse to give early review codes to reviewers. It's like perhaps they knew this game wasn't that good, so they didn't give out review codes so that reviewers wouldn't give bad scores, which would affect sales. Speculation aside, Forspoken is a major flop. It is such a letdown in every aspect. Story, combat, optimization. This is pretty unfortunate because the developers, Luminous Productions, had the backing of Square Enix, and this is the studio's first standalone game. But the problem is this game needed way more development time to fix all of the issues. And even then, this game would still not be that good because there are just some fundamental flaws that Forspoken has that time just can't fix. For now, before I talk about the long list of negatives that Forspoken has, let's talk about what this game does well. The one thing I can say for certainty that this game does well is how they made traversing around the world feel really fun. Running across large empty plains at Mach 10 speeds, or hopping from floating island to floating island while being able to scale almost any wall unimpeded is an amazing feeling that no other game can really replicate. This is probably the one gameplay aspect that Forspoken lived up to in the gameplay trailers. As for what else this game does well, what else does this game do well? Well, the graphics are pretty good when the game's running on all cylinders. If this game was really running at its best, and that's a big if, this game looked really beautiful. There's a bunch of particle effects that are flying during combat, and the textures and the character models are all extremely detailed. It's easy to see where most of the budget went to. But the thing is, it's 2023, all games look good now, so Forspoken doesn't really get that many brownie points from me. Oh, and the music and sound design is really good. Top tier, no complaints there. The sound design team did an amazing bang up job with the sound design of Forspoken. And that's about it for what I liked about Forspoken. Now on to all the things that were bad in Forspoken. And there's a lot. First of all, this game is horribly optimized. I've seen cement go faster than the frame rate here. During gameplay, there's always constant frame stuttering, lag, freezing. And it's because this game was released way too early. It needed way more time in the oven to fix these technical issues. Hell, I was fighting the frame rate drops more than I was fighting the enemies. Like, yeah, I get it, lots of particle effects are really pretty and cool, but it's not worth it if your game is moving slower than a PowerPoint presentation. Not to mention, this game had some insane hardware requirements too. Like, these requirements are even higher than Elden Ring, and that game looks just as good. What's the point of having a game look this good if it's less stable than Crypto? A lot of fights in this game could have been really fun, but were ruined by the horrible technical issues that happened mid-fight. Like, this fight here would have been fun for me, but it was made terrible from the constant freezing and lag. It's probably like this because Luminous Productions were running out of time to optimize the game, so instead of delaying it, they just pushed it out the door in a broken state. Let's talk about the gameplay now. The gameplay is quite bland and just not fun most of the time. That's not to say there weren't any fun moments in the gameplay. There were actually some moments where I had fun with the combat, when there's a ton of enemies on the screen and I'm just blowing shit up with my spells and particle effects are flying everywhere. Those moments felt fun. Not so much from on PC though, as it was fighting for its life just so it could play in the highest graphic settings. I swear I heard my PC gasp for air like SpongeBob was in that episode where he was at Sandy's house. Anyway, the reason why the gameplay isn't fun is because it's really spammy and repetitive. The main combat loop here is that you kite enemies while spamming the shoot button and you get a bunch of pretty cool spells to deal damage with. The problem is that the tougher enemies are damage sponges, so you have to run and gun, spamming the same attacks the entire time. They also have these really big AoE attacks that still hit you even if you dodge. Like right here, I'm pressing the dodge button to try to avoid damage, but the AoE hitbox is so massive that I still get hit by it. Which means if you don't want to get hit, you're gonna have to shoot at them from a distance. But sometimes the arenas aren't big enough to do that, so you have to get hit anyway. It feels like they could have added so much more to the combat to keep it engaging, but they didn't. But honestly, the combat is the least egregious part about Forspoken because the world is so generic and empty. When will developers realize that being an open world game means nothing if you don't put anything interesting in it? Forspoken has such a huge bog standard open world with generic fantasy elements that you could replace with a random Tumblr fantasy fanfic and you would get something just as memorable. It also doesn't help that there's barely any worthwhile content in it. 90% of the things in Forspoken's world are just repetitive busy work like random treasure chests or ruins that you have to clear out. If you took out all the low effort busy work this game has, then there would be literally nothing in this world. Just because you can make an open world game doesn't mean that you should. More game does not mean better game. Yeah, I know developers had this really cool traversal mechanic and they wanted to have a huge play space so you can use it, and I'll admit it's pretty cool, but at what cost? Because they seem to have forgotten the part where you actually have to make it interesting to explore. Now there's gonna be story spoilers ahead, so if you don't want to be spoiled on the story then you can skip ahead, but it doesn't really matter because the story is so forgettable anyway. The story of Forspoken is that you play as Frey Holland, a homeless orphan in New York. Her life is miserable there as she's constantly trying to make ends meet while on the run from some unsavory folks that she had previous run-ins with. Frey one day finds a magical talking cuff that transports her to the world of Africa. Oops, I mean Athia. She finds out that the people of Athnia, oh my bad again, the people of Athia are on the brink of extinction because of the corruption that's controlled by the 4 rulers that have gone mad. Now you play as Frey as she tries to find a way to get back to New York. And that's pretty much the story. The problem with this is that it's just really generic and boring. The funny thing is, I actually don't really have a problem with generic stories themselves because they can be made up for with well-written characters and interesting world building. Forspoken, unfortunately, has none of that. The characters are all forgettable and the lore is about as interesting as a wet piece of cardboard, so the mediocrity sticks out like a sore thumb. I have a feeling the reason why there's a lack of any deeper level rating is because Luminous Productions were running out of time and had to push the game out the door. The reason I suspect this is because Forspoken ended up being really short. I beat the game in 14 hours and that's with me doing all the side quests and events. And yeah, I did skip a lot of busy work fluff that this game has, but even if I did all of them, I would say that probably adds 5 more hours of content, and that's me being generous. Even if you did absolutely everything this game has to offer, that would only add up to about 20 hours of gameplay, which is really low for the $70 to $95 that they're charging. Also, the ending was really rushed because after the 3rd boss, they did an insane exposition dump for about the last 2 hours of gameplay that completely ruined the pacing of the story. And it's just unfortunate because this game desperately needed at least another year in development to fix these issues. But the generic story isn't even the biggest atrocity that Forspoken has unleashed upon this planet. Oh no, that award goes to the god-awful character writing that I had the misfortune of listening to. And almost all of the cringe comes from the main character herself, Frey. Frey has got to be the most unlikable, unfunny, and obnoxious protagonist I've experienced recently in video games. It's like they brought in a Marvel movie writer to write an angsty teenager, and the result is that we get a main character who's self-centered, ungrateful, and generally just a prick to everyone around her. The writers think that making Frey swear every other sentence is relatable, but it's not. It's just cringe character writing. And there's really no logic in why she acts like this because Frey's whole goal the entire game is to go back home to New York, where she was homeless, powerless, and miserable. So when she's transported to Alpaca, where she's wanted and appreciated by the people there, she completely blows them off because she wants to go back to her miserable life back in New York? It makes no sense. Frey is so unlikable that I even started cheering when the other characters are scolding her for her attitude. It's just baffling how the writers thought this was compelling character writing at all. Overall, Forspoken is just a tragic tale of a game that promised a lot but didn't really deliver on very much. That's not to say this game doesn't do anything right. Traversing around the open world feels great, the graphics can look really good at times, and the sound design knocks it out of the park. But this game does way more wrong than it does right. The gameplay is repetitive and boring, the open world is empty with very little actual content, there's a slew of technical issues, the story is very surface level, and the writing is cringe at best and horrendous at worst. Forspoken needed so much more time in the oven, and it's a shame that it had so many problems that came with it. But they're still charging $70 to $95 for this game, and because of that, I cannot recommend this game at all. And if you really want to play it, get on Xbox Game Pass or PlayStation Plus, otherwise, stay away from this game. That's it for this review. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more reviews in the future. See ya.